Get cool stuff for what you were going to do anyway. Drink beer. With Buy Beer, Get Gear from Labatt, you can just snap a photo of your receipt and upload it to the website to rack up points for exclusive merch. Get points for every purchase, whether you're grabbing a pint on draft, a case for a party, or a tall boy at the stadium. Any size, any product, anywhere you buy Labatt. Buy beer, get gear. Sign up now at rewards.labattusa.com.
Radio.
Hey, Dabo Sweeney, congrats. I got you in, baby.
This is entertainment. People pay to watch this.
Pass to a cutting Hiltz. He darts in. He scores!
People actually subscribe.
All across central New York.
Time expired! Syracuse has done it!
It's Drive Time with your host, Tim Leonard.
Hey, guess what? I'm getting wild, man.
We welcome you into Drive Time. Tuesday afternoon in central New York. And the snow is back here in the Cuse. Just when you get a little taste of spring, we had to get some more snow. No Syracuse basketball in the middle of the week this week, which means Syracuse basketball isn't going to lose. They're going to go undefeated tonight and tomorrow night. That's the first time in a while we have confidently said that Syracuse basketball will make it through the weekdays and they won't lose the game. They'll be back in action on Saturday, and we haven't been talking a whole lot about the games recently, unfortunately. We've been talking a whole lot about what could be next for the Orange, who could be their next head coach, when will they make the call on Adrian Autry, what will happen once they do, and who is Syracuse going to interview, and who could they possibly bring in to replace Adrian Autry? Will it be an in-family candidate? Will it be an outside-the-family candidate for the first time in a while? They haven't had very many opportunities to go outside the family, of course, and this will be interesting. It will really tell us a lot about where Syracuse basketball stands in the pecking order, and where the school sits right now is in a fascinating spot in terms of juggling NIL, juggling the new ways of college sports, and trying to figure out, do they lean into football? Do they lean more into basketball? How do they handle the rev share component of it? And how much money do they want to give to a head coach? How much money can they give to a new men's basketball head coach if and when they are making that decision as we wind down the clock, it seems, on the Adrian Autry era? Adrian Autry talking yesterday on his ACC coaches call using the past tense some, and that led to many people pointing to that it does feel like things are coming to an end with Coach Autry. We've known that for a little bit. The results of late have not helped, and it seems like Syracuse has started the process of trying to figure out who could be the next head coach for their men's basketball program. So we will continue to talk about that over the course of our hour with you today, and we will take your phone calls on said topic. If you want to talk some men's lacrosse, if you want to talk some women's basketball, if you want to talk, I don't know, the USA hockey big win in the gold medal game, which was fun, that I didn't even get to yesterday because we're talking so much about Syracuse basketball and Syracuse basketball's next coach, then you can call in. 315-437-7644 is always our phone number to call in to any and all of our shows for ESPN 44 if you'd like to chime in. Get on in the Q Sports Talk chat as well. We'll take your comments in the chat. There are no breaks there. I'm answering questions. I'm giving you any insight I have on the situation in the Q Sports Talk chat and on our YouTube stream as well. I will try not to neglect the YouTube chat. We have a YouTube simulcast of the show that is always up and running anytime we go live with any of our shows here, whether that is pregame, postgame for any game, Orange Nation, Drive Time. You can find us at Q Sports Talk on the YouTube page. With that, we begin with our Burdick BMW of Cicero opening drive. And I want to come at this from a different angle today. Yesterday, I took a lot of callers on the conversation of who should they hire, and it feels like a lot of you are convinced we are down to 2 names already in a search that hasn't even started formally. And I'm not so sure that it will be just 2 names, But we've talked about a lot of the big names, and it feels like everyone's list starts with Josh Schertz or Bryan Hodgson when you're talking about outside the family. If you're someone that believes in inside the family, make sure you don't voice that opinion on Twitter, or else people will really come after you on any of the social media sites. If you actually believe that Mike Hopkins, an alum of the program, or Jerry McNamara, an alum of the program, is a good person and maybe should be considered because of what they've done in their head coaching careers to this point, be careful. Tread lightly if you want to make that take anywhere out there publicly, because there are some people that really, really disagree, and they are very adamant that it should be outside the family at this point. And that's the conversation that we've continued to have. What I want to do today is let's try and put ourselves in the shoes of Bryan Hodgson or Josh Schertz and try and answer the question of what are they thinking right now about Syracuse and where that stands in the pecking order, and what jobs out there might they be as interested in at Syracuse, more interested in than Syracuse. What are the jobs that we should be worried might swoop in and take a candidate that Syracuse would like? We'll never know the exact answer to that question probably. Once Syracuse does pick the next head coach, we'll hear only good things about said next head coach, and we won't know exactly if it was plan C, plan D, plan A, plan B. But let's try and figure out, if you are a hot name right now, if you are a mid-major coach that's looking to take a step up to a high major, what schools would you be considering? Let's begin with Bryan Hodgson. There was some good reporting today on the Field of 68 from Jeff Goodman on where things stand in the coaching carousel, what he's hearing, who are the candidates for each team that might end up looking for a new head coach next year. And we, of course, know Kansas State is already open, and there are a couple other low major jobs that have already come open, San Diego, and there will be more that will trickle out, of course. Arizona State seems obvious that it is going to open with Bobby Hurley. Providence seems very obvious that that one is going to open with English. And apparently Providence, according to Jeff Goodman, their budget was double what Xavier's budget was this year. And he's talking about maybe they would go and get Richard Pitino after one sort of down year at Xavier. He would look for a exit from Xavier to Providence. And we spoke with Kevin Sweeney earlier today on Orange Nation, and he kind of walked through some of the big jobs out there. He brought up that Ohio State is a job of note that everyone is monitoring and wondering, could Ohio State move on from Jake Diebler after 2 years if they don't make the tournament? They're right now in the mid-30s in the national rankings, and they've been sort of okay under Jake Diebler, and that is a job that if it became open would immediately become the biggest job that we know of right now in the coaching carousel. And that would make things very interesting. There's always the looming threat as well of retirements. Bill Self is 63 years old. Bill Self is dealing with the Darren Peterson situation this year. He's had some health issues recently. We don't know what he's thinking. And you could also counter that and say, well, even if Kansas moves on or they get news that Bill Self is retiring, they might just hire an in-house, or dare we say in-family, those buzzwords. They might just go in-family to replace Bill Self. Rick Barnes at Tennessee could retire at any point, and it wouldn't be that surprising. They might just go in-family to replace him. Justin Gainey is a name that was brought up for the NC State job last cycle. It seemed like it was down to Gainey or Will Wade. He had some NC State ties, but he is well thought of as an assistant at Tennessee. Maybe they just hire him in family. Oregon and Dana Altman are having a terrible year, and Dana Altman is getting up there and probably thinking about retirement at some point. So if Oregon becomes open, that's immediately a job that's at the top of this coaching carousel, because they got Phil Knight and they got all kinds of money. And they've got a pretty good history, but really what matters the most right now is resources and money. So that would be an enticing job to a lot of the hot names out there if Oregon opened up. Based on what we know right now, Bryan Hodgson to me, definitely makes sense for Syracuse because of his roots. And it seems like there is mutual interest there. But let's play the game of what other schools would Bryan Hodgson, as of what we know right now, probably take an interview with, be courted by, or be interested in. I think you start with LSU. In interesting reading Jeff Goodman's article on the Field of 68 today, he said, quote, "My pick for LSU would be Bryan Hodgson." He was at Alabama with Nate Oates, of course, before that at Buffalo. So he has experience in the SEC. He has experience recruiting in the SEC footprint. And LSU is going to pay a considerable amount of money for their next head coach. I would venture a guess that LSU will be ready to get in a bidding war and understand that they need to pay for their next head coach, and they probably have deeper pockets than Syracuse, if we're being honest about the situation. So that's the school that concerns you maybe when you hear stuff like Jeff Goodman, who's well-connected, saying, my pick right now would be Bryan Hodgson goes to LSU. The other school to bring up, I don't think this is as good of a job as Syracuse, but it's still noteworthy in bringing it up. It's possible that Pittsburgh opens after Jeff Capel has a big buyout right now. $12 million is reported, and it's not going well. Remember, that was Heather Lyke, who is now with Syracuse, who made the decision to hire Jeff Capel. Pittsburgh's in tough shape as an athletic department right now. But the reason I bring them up is Alan Green, the athletic director at Pittsburgh, was at Buffalo when Bryan Hodgson was at Buffalo and was an assistant coach. So there is some familiarity there. And clearly, Bryan Hodgson is going to be courted by multiple schools, including Syracuse, probably. And clearly, his agent is going to do as good a job as possible at driving up his salary and driving up, basically, the leverage that Bryan Hodgson has. So, is Syracuse prepared to get in a bidding war for their next head coach? That's the conversation that I think we will never know the answer to, and it's tough to actually know exactly where Syracuse stands and what they're willing to pay. And it's a private university, and we'll never know his salary publicly and the full details of it if and when they hire the next head coach. But Bryan Hodgson, I would watch LSU, and that's the one that scares you a little bit. If you do want Bryan Hodgson to be the next head coach at Syracuse, can they compete with LSU in terms of salary and what they're offering? Obviously, Syracuse has great tradition, great prestige, great history. Bryan Hodgson has the connection to this area. He has apparently a connection with the Lallies. There are a lot of things going for Syracuse. I'm just playing devil's advocate and bringing up that LSU is going to have a deep checkbook most likely. And it does seem that LSU's top pick, if and when they move on from McMahon, is trying to get Will Wade back. My best guess from reading up on that and talking to some people around NC State, my best guess is Will Wade will probably use the LSU attraction to maybe get an extension from NC State or get more resources for his roster next year at NC State, which reportedly NC State had about a $12 million roster this year. So they're doing pretty well in terms of resources. I don't think Will Wade is going to go back to LSU, but that's been some rumblings lately because LSU has some people working in the board of trustees there that have a relationship with Will Wade, some people that are back. There's some connection there that has kind of led to some speculation that maybe Will Wade would go back to LSU. Don't really see it happening, but even if that happens, then NC State is open, and Bryan Hodgson might think, wow, NC State's a pretty good job, and then you're in a bidding war with them. And NC State's got to go out there and try and get a good coach, and that's where the dominoes continue to fall here. Now let's play the game with Josh Schertz, and then we'll get to some of your thoughts on the phone line. Josh Schertz is a tough conversation to have right now when you try and figure out what schools would he be interested in. Because one thing that Syracuse does have going for it right now is they're one of the top jobs that we presume is going to be open just because it's not that great of a year for big name jobs as it stands right now. That can all change. Would Josh Schertz be interested in LSU? I'm sure they'd be interested in him. I'm sure that he'd be interested. He would get interest from pretty much every job that is out there right now, hypothetically. There's been some connection to Providence with him. There's been some connection to Oklahoma. Not exactly sure with him. Cincinnati maybe is another school that you don't know what exactly he would be looking for. Would he want a Big 12 job? Would he want an SEC job? Or would he value an ACC job as the ACC is trending up a little bit? And as I said, if Ohio State opens, if Oregon opens, if Tennessee opens, if there's a retirement at Kansas, then the dominoes start falling. And you just feel like whatever the top job is, Josh Schertz is probably going to go there. Or he's just going to sit pat and say, I'm making north of $2 million right now at St. Louis, reportedly. I've got the best resources in this conference, probably. I'm going to make the tournament this year. I'm going to make the tournament next year. I'm still going to be a hot name next year, and maybe I just bide my time for a better job that opens next year. That's not out of the realm of possibility. From what we know of Josh Schertz, it seems like he has paid his dues. He's got a great story of working his way up from the lower levels. Not that long ago, he was a D2 head coach at Lincoln Memorial, a tough place to win. He won there. He's really done everything right to get to this point and overachieved to get to this point. So I don't know how willing he would be to jump at kind of a risky job when he knows he's the hot name and he can probably just wait it out. As Kevin Sweeney put it earlier today on Orange Nation, Josh Schertz is going to be tough because he wants to win a national championship. Can you win a national championship at Syracuse right now? We know they've done it before, but it's a different era. So those are the conversations we're having here. Let's go to the phone lines here on our Burdick BMW of Cicero opening drive. Let's begin with Chris in Syracuse, who is first up. Hey, Chris.
Hey, Tim. Here's a suggestion. Why can't Syracuse go back to the Big East? It's hard for SU to compete against the like of North Carolina, Duke, Louisville, Clemson. I think it's beneficial for this team, not only for as far as recruiting wise, as far as the Northeast. I think it would be that they can keep the football for the ACC. Why can't they keep the back? Why can't they go back
you can't really have football in the ACC and basketball in the Big East. That really wouldn't make any sense. No one does that.
Well, Notre Dame has its own private day.
Yeah, but we're not Notre Dame. That's a whole different category. Notre Dame football is in a different stratosphere, and I don't think you can compare it to that, Chris. I think the answer here is they went in on the ACC deal, which I know the basketball program has struggled since that decision, but it was the right decision to do for the overall context of Syracuse athletics. It was the appropriate decision. And right now, Syracuse is in a position where they're trying to be an attractive football school for a potential super conference like everyone. And there is a world where maybe in 5-6 years we see Syracuse fall back a little bit and they're in what looks like more of a Big East situation in basketball. Maybe we get to that. It's hard to be a true fortune teller on the state of college athletics. But I don't think that they can pivot out of the ACC right now, and I don't think we should have any remorse in the decision they made to join the ACC.
Well, honestly, I don't think this team's gonna. They're never gonna finish like top 4 in ACC. I don't think, even with the head coach.
Yeah, but think about the football team and think about all the benefits of being in the ACC compared to the Big East. Right now, there are plenty of schools that are in the Big East that would probably jump at the chance to get in the ACC, right?
I guess a bigger conference, but it's a little fine. It's got a way they at least can play Villanova, Georgetown, at least play St. John's, and they're part of their non-conference schedule. But I honestly feel like, before I go, the Big East was a better conference years ago than ACC. In ACC, they had 11 bids years ago. That was when SU was still there, obviously, in Pittsburgh. And
yeah,
it's more competitive overall than the ACC from top to bottom. There's no question.
I hear you, Chris. I'll let you go. I think we all miss the glory days of the Big East, and I understand that it's sort of a bummer to not, it's definitely a bummer to not have rivalries and some of the history that we all came to love in the Big East. But Syracuse made the right decision to join the ACC, and that's where they sit right now. And we'll see in maybe 5-6 years if things look different. And maybe if you have the opportunity to pivot in that situation, it's a different conversation. But as of right now, there's no world where they're going to be next year or 2 years from now in the Big East in basketball and ACC and football. You can't do that. Let's keep the phone calls coming. Let's go down to my hometown, Cary, North Carolina, where we've got Tony in Cary, North Carolina. What's up, Tony?
Hey, Tim. Hope you're doing well.
Yeah, I'm doing well. How are you?
Good. Hey, I just want to mention, I know there's been a lot of talk about Mike Hopkins, and my concern with Mike Hopkins is that he's been removed from the college game for a while, and he's doing some kind of, analyst or something with the
he's head of player development and an assistant coach. Yep, for the Pelicans.
I guess my question is because of that, and he's not in a current mid-major or a Power Four conference school coaching. How is he going to bring transfers in if we get a guy like the guy from South Florida? I'm sure there's going to be people that's coming in, and regardless, whoever they hire that's in the college ranks right now is going to be bringing in people. Right now, we have no recruits. And some of these coaches are pulling in players just like NC State's head coach did with Cordelia Copeland, pulled them in and got some transfers. And so that's my question with hiring Hop. I don't know what, I just question that. Let's just put it that way.
Yeah, Tony, I think two things on this. First, I think that him being out of the college game is not really a concern overall to me. He's still been working as a basketball coach. It's not like he's lost touch. He understands that NIL is a factor. He understands the college game has changed since then. I don't worry too much about Mike Hopkins evolving or Mike Hopkins adjusting to a new reality in college basketball. The second point, I think, is a legitimate point and an interesting conversation on, well, if your concern is he's not a current college coach, so which players could he bring over? Obviously, as it stands right now, he would not be bringing over as many good players that are ready and already in college as Bryan Hodgson. Bryan Hodgson, you look at his roster at South Florida, I believe it's Wes Ennis is the guard there that's a junior that's averaging about 16 points per game. He was at the lower levels. He's now at USF. Seems like he would be worthwhile as a player that could make that leap to the power conference level with whatever job probably that Bryan Hodgson takes. Not a lock that he would just follow his head coach. We can't presume everything, but he seems like a player you would want. There are a couple seniors that I think are out of eligibility. And then there's another guy that's averaging double figures that I can't remember off the top of my head, but maybe there's 2 or 3 players that you would consider could make the jump from USF to Syracuse, and that is intriguing for sure. I mean, I'd be lying if I said that isn't a component or something you consider, but Mike Hopkins is a tremendous recruiter, and there are a lot of examples of coaches from the NBA that have made the transition to college, and they put together a good roster. He's going to have time to attack the transfer portal. The hope is whoever the next head coach is in a good spot resources-wise to get off to a good start, and the expectation would be make the tournament. It's a valid point to say, well, I'd rather have the guy that already has some of his guys in his system. I think that's totally valid. We saw that work with Pat Kelsey when he made the leap to Louisville. Will Wade, Kadir Copeland, I brought that up before, and that's what Tony brings up. I think it's a valid point. It's something you consider, and that maybe is a piece of the Mike Hopkins situation that's a disadvantage to him. But I don't worry about Mike Hopkins being out of the college game for a while. I think he is the type of coach that will adjust and evolve. We'll hit a break, 315-437-7644 if you'd like to call in. We'll get to more of your thoughts on the phone lines as we continue on Drive Time. I mean, I just named the USF roster. I don't know the player's name, but does that really matter, guys? Wes Ennis is good. Sorry, guys, I'm not totally versed on the USF roster, but obviously if they hire him, I would jump right in on that. I mean, can only do so much. I from what I've seen of Ennis, I would put him in the category if he can make the leap, Philly. Is that who you're talking about or no? Because I thought he was a junior. Yeah, Mike Hopkins has not been out of college that long. I agree. Right. They do have a GM. Yeah, I don't know about Brian Dutcher. I mean, I think you give him a call. That's fair, San Diego Cuse. And I know you're a San Diego guy, and you probably are. But it's tough to leave San Diego to go to Syracuse, I would think. Right, Mike. That's a good point on the Big East move. They would have less money. Yeah, ND, we can't compare him to ND. That's a totally different situation. Yeah, Jared Calhoun is a hot name for sure. He's going to be wanted by... He's almost in the Josh Schertz category. Not quite, but pretty much anyone that is looking for a new job, looking for a new coach, I should say, is going to call Schertz and Calhoun. I would think. I could see Oklahoma for Schertz, yeah. Would you classify Bryan Hodgson as a big name, Mark Curtis? I think Hop or Hodgson would generate very good NIL, Philly. Sorry, I'm catching up here. Gabriel, you really like SpongeBob, don't you? See what the YouTube chat's got. Nick is really bringing the positivity today in the YouTube chat. Syracuse is the bottom feeder with 0 following. Pittsburgh is exactly the school Syracuse is competing with. If you think Syracuse is a high major, you think Wake Forest is a high major. We're really down here, Nick. They're a much better job than Wake and Pitt. That's what all the anonymous coaches or all the coaches voted on this year. We kind of have proof of that, and I think you're crazy to think they're in that situation. Yeah, they're fine. Let's not get too down on the job. The conversation more with Syracuse is what Kevin Sweeney said earlier today. Do they have the financial means from like a staff pool? How much are they going to pay the head coach? They haven't ever paid a ton for a head coach here. As I've said many times, Josh Schertz is probably making more than Coach Autry right now. So how are you going to get him without giving him a lot more money probably than what you have been paying to this point? And can you do that? I mean, everyone just says, oh, pay up. It's not that easy.
Watch your favorite ESPN Syracuse sports talk shows on QSportsTalk.com.
Rolling along on Drive Time, Tuesday afternoon in the Cuse. 315-437-7644 if you'd like to chime in on Syracuse basketball. Who should be the next head coach? Who would you hire? What are your conversations you're having amongst your friends about the potential next head coach at Syracuse? We continue to have that conversation 5 to 6 p.m. every weeknight. No SU basketball games to react to during the week. The SU women's team will be in action on Thursday night. That's a big game, and we can chat some about the SU women's basketball team and the men's lacrosse team for that matter as I will be calling all of those games this week as the week continues and as our show continues. Let's go back to the phone lines right now for ESPN 44 if you'd like to call in. Let's go to Connecticut, where we've got Rob in Connecticut. What's up, Rob?
TL, how's it going today, my man?
It's doing well, Rob. How are you?
I'm doing real well. I mean, we're recovering from a blizzard, and we're probably going to get more snow tomorrow. But,
yeah, the one time we didn't get snow, and it's somewhere else. I mean, not to rub it in, but we don't get to claim that very much.
Well, hey, what goes around comes around, my friend? So real quick, as far as the hire, and then I have a question, the actual reason why I called. I'm going to say no to all coaches that would be legacy picks, and we'll start from the top with Mike Hopkins. So no on any legacy pick. I don't have any preference. Jackson Holzer likes Bruce Pearl.
Oh, come on with the Bruce Pearl stuff. That's not happening. All right.
Okay, right. So, look, that's not the reason why I called. Look, I don't have a preference on a hire. This is the reason why I called. What is more important? Getting a coach, like, for the sake of getting a coach so we tie up all our loose ends and, get a roster, or conduct due diligence with the hire, but then we're going to wait, and then other people may get hired because of
No, I wouldn't worry about that.
Okay, all right.
Yeah.
Well, why do you say that?
Well, because everyone is on the same timeline, or they will be on the same timeline. In other words, if you want Bryan Hodgson, right, just throw out his name.
Okay.
There's a very good chance he is coaching in the NCAA tournament. Heck, he might become an even bigger name than he is right now, because in a couple weeks he might be a 12 seed and South Florida might knock off a 5 seed like we see once every year probably, and maybe he goes to the Sweet 16, and he's going to be talking to schools for sure, and he's going to have conversations. Like last year we saw Will Wade was basically already committed to NC State when he was the coach at McNeese State, and he was honest with his players about that situation. But there's no rush here. If they jump into the waters after the ACC tournament, they're right in line with every other school, basically. Kansas State, I guess you could say, has already started talking to coaches potentially, but I'm sure Syracuse is doing that one. And any good agent is going to wait for all of the bidders to be out there so that they can make as much money for their guy as possible. So there's no rush in terms of the timeline. The transfer portal doesn't open until April officially, and that's after the season. The next head coach will come in and he'll have the same timeline as every other job opening that's out there.
Hey, TL, who do you like? Who's your sneaky team for the tournament this year? Who's, who could be that Cinderella team? Do you have one?
Well, shoot, I've been watching a good amount of South Florida. I just mentioned them. I mean, I could see them pulling off an upset because they do have some elite athletes on that team. So, I don't know. It's an interesting question because we don't see as many upsets, I think, nowadays because of the NIL era, right? I mean, we saw that last year. I don't think when I fill out my bracket this year, I'll be picking as many upsets as maybe 4 or 5 years ago.
Yeah. All right. Good stuff. Take care, man.
All right. Thanks for checking in, Rob. Rob in Connecticut, who is snowed under right now, and we are getting a little snow, and we can't really brag about the snow we've gotten this year. It's been a rough year here in Syracuse, as most are. Yeah, the Bruce Pearl stuff, I'm seeing that in the chat. I don't even want to entertain that conversation. Crazy to me that was brought up, and I will say from what I've gathered, it seems like Jackson, who brought it up, understands that it's crazy and he's still bringing it up, but I don't know why you're even talking about it. And that's all I'll say on that situation. But that is an interesting thing to consider. Well, what if Bryan Hodgson elevates his stock even more in the next little bit? What if he does make the tournament? And I'm not one of these people that thinks, I like Bryan Hodgson right now, but if he loses on a buzzer beater in the American final, I am so out on Bryan Hodgson. Or the same way that some people talk about Jerry McNamara. We'll get to more of your comments on the phone lines. You see the phones are ringing at 315-437-7644 for ESPN 44 if you'd like to call in on the program and talk more about Syracuse basketball and who they should hire next as a head coach after Adrian Autry. The idea that Jerry shouldn't be considered unless they make the tournament, I mean, are you really going to put all of your eggs on who makes that last shot in a close game? And like if you like Jerry McNamara right now and he loses on a buzzer beater versus they win on a buzzer beater to go to the NCAA tournament and then they get smoked in the first round? Is that really going to change things that much? I'm sure the school's opinion of Bryan Hodgson right now is what it is. And if anything, he could elevate it if he goes and has a really nice March, or maybe they pull off an upset or two. Then we're talking about him maybe more in the category of he's getting everyone's attention versus, he's not quite like Josh Schertz right now, where I feel like everyone should be calling Josh Schertz, and that is the number one name. And then I'd say the number two name is Jared Calhoun, and then Hodgson is kind of in the next tier for me in terms of mid-major looking to go to a high major. Tony Skinn is maybe in that tier as well, but I think we're talking more about Bryan Hodgson because our understanding is that he has interest in the job. How much interest he has in the job is maybe being overblown. I don't know. I mean, it seems like it would make logical sense that he would be interested. There's been some reporting out there that he does have interest in the job, so it's right to assume that he's interested. But we're going to learn if he's also interested in LSU or Pittsburgh or in Oklahoma or another school that might come open and might try and get Bryan Hodgson. Let's go back to the phone lines. We're going to go to Nadal, it says, in Rochester. What's up?
Hey, how's it going, man?
Good. How are you?
Pretty good. I just wanted to say that, I think Hopkins really wouldn't be the worst thing for the program. I think one of the biggest problems since Hopkins left has been recruiting. I mean, just look at the people our player evaluation since then has been really awful, to the point where we had to hire Alex Klein. I don't think anyone since he's left has helped us recruit and evaluate these players. I mean, the list from when he left is pretty bad. Jalen Carey, Bryson Goodine. Kadari Richmond was great, obviously, but then he butted heads with Boeheim, so he had to leave. Benny Williams. I mean, I think Sadiq White. Sometimes I think that maybe we get these players that are ranked really highly, like Sadiq and Donnie Freeman, because other programs might have evaluated them and passed. I mean, there's no guarantee of that.
I think you could be onto something, but I mean, in the case of Donnie Freeman, the guy that everyone's talking about, Bryan Hodgson, recruited him really hard at Alabama, and we were sort of joking today off air, man, Donnie probably wishes he went to Alabama right now. I mean, who knows? I'm sure he's doing fine in terms of the money he's making at Syracuse and all that. But I think when you're talking about Sadiq or Donnie, a lot of good schools wanted him, but you might have a point that Syracuse is getting the guys that don't have quite as good of offer sheets as their ranking. I think that is something that could be talked about at least. And I think you're onto something when you talk about the talent evaluation. So it's an interesting conversation. I think they also just hired Alex Klein because they're doing what everyone is doing right now. You need a general manager, the way college basketball is going. Yeah.
For sure. The other thing is that, I like the options that you're presenting. I don't know if these people really have as much experience as some of the successful coaches that were hired this year. I mean, Jay Lucas, he's been everywhere. Duke, Kentucky, Texas. Ryan Odom, obviously, he's coached 4 March Madness games. Will Wade has coached multiple March Madness games. I mean, I don't think that anyone being offered is coached.
You're probably right. I mean, Josh Schertz, I think, is the hottest name, and he's still pretty young as a head coach. What's it been, like 5 years since he's been at the D2 level? He had an okay first year at St. Louis, and they're a rocket ship this year, and that should be applauded, of course. But I think you're onto something that there were probably better overall candidates last year. Kevin Willard jumping from Maryland to Villanova, that's a no-brainer where you would feel great if you hire him. I'm not sure where Schertz would have ranked necessarily last year, but I don't think Bryan Hodgson would be the second or third name on some of these people's lists in terms of hottest names right now if you were to take into account all of last year. And I made that point that Hodgson's a little risky. I mean, he's 38 years old. He's been a head coach for 3 years. And the perception around him was he was the recruiter at Buffalo and Alabama, and that's all he had to do. So he's definitely dispelled the narrative a little bit in terms of the culture that he's building at Arkansas State, or he built there, and what he's doing in his first year at USF. But I do think that if Hodgson didn't work out, there will be a lot of people saying they took a chance on someone they shouldn't have taken a chance on. He's too young and he's not that proven.
Yeah, so would it be that hard to, this is what people do for players. Like, we just need to swipe someone that's in the field this year, that's coaching in the tournament, because we know that that's what, at the end of the day, if you have a team in the tournament, then likely you know what it looks like to have a machine that has gotten you there, like whether it's recruiting, whether that's coaching, all of it together. So I think the best indicator of a coach that we should get is if they've played March Madness games or coached March Madness games.
Yeah, it's just, it's obvious to say, but if you're in the tournament right now as a head coach, you're succeeding at that school to some extent, and Syracuse hasn't been in the tournament in 5 years. So you got to know that Syracuse is going to be good from a resources standpoint if you're going to make a jump from a team that you just took to the tournament. I don't know if you're talking about like mid-major or a high major or a power conference, but if you're going to make a jump from a power conference team that is in the tournament to Syracuse, then you better have gotten some promises that the roster is going to have a good deal of resources next year.
Right. And if they don't have, and if we can't get someone like that because they can't promise that, then we're screwed either way. So what's the point?
Well, then it maybe becomes more of a conversation of you fall back into the Mike Hopkins. Like, for all we know, Mike Hopkins might not be option number one, but I think he's definitely being looked at, and they have to consider all options here because everyone is throwing out two names, like I said, Schertz and Hodgson, and those guys could go somewhere else. And there are plenty of other names you could go to, but it feels like those are the two that everyone wants to start with. And you're right that it's going to be tough to get those guys. And I don't know, it's going to be fascinating to see how it all plays out in it all.
Do you think that that Hopkins has told anyone he actually would come back? Because, I don't know if he would leave New Orleans for the Syracuse job. He has a pretty sweet gig right now.
Yeah, I think there is interest from Hop, just based on what I've gathered. And yeah, I would say confidently that he is interested, and it seems like there is a faction of the former players that would be interested in him coming back. So there's at least been some discussion there, or some knowledge that Hop wants to at least take an interview, or I would be surprised if he doesn't at least get himself in that room, because it seems like he is interested from what I've gathered. So
yeah, obviously he's an excellent, player evaluator. That's what he's doing right now and developer. That's what he's doing right now in the NBA. So he's top notch at that. But I just don't know if he obviously doesn't have any experience in NIL. He was out of the game for that. So I think a big piece of it is going to be he's going to have to figure out, which I don't think is ideal right now. I don't think we can mess around with this.
Yeah, good stuff, Nadal. I appreciate you calling in. Nadal in Rochester. Call back anytime. I think that was the first time I chatted with him. 315-437-7644. If you'd like to chime in on the show, we'll work in a timeout here. More of your thoughts on Drive Time as we continue.
This is
Yeah, Schertz he's a very good candidate, but I think the caller's got a good point, Philly, that the coaching cycle last year probably had some more surefire names just on the surface. Lucas, I don't know if I would have jumped to name him first. I agree. But he's worked out, and I think a lot of that is they've got good resources there. Tony Skin's kind of a defensive-minded guy. He's going to be highly sought after. Yeah, I would imagine they'll give him a call. Only 10 feet of snow. Philly, I don't know what Hodgson's demands are. It seems like you're very confident in what you're saying, and I'm not saying you're wrong, but I would just say that it's not necessarily for me that Hodgson is going to come in and be like, I need this. It's what if LSU offers him X and Syracuse can't counter that offer? It really doesn't matter how much Hodgson is going to be aggressive himself. If he has an offer on the table from LSU and they're paying him X and they're paying his assistant coaches X and their roster X and Syracuse is not up to that, then obviously there's some pros at Syracuse that LSU doesn't have. And he has a connection to Syracuse too. But that's the conversation we don't know the answer to. So you might be right that he just wants to bring his guys and he's not going to ask for a ton of money. But, I mean, his agent, there's people involved that are going to drive up his price tag for sure. There's other schools that are going to be interested in him. I don't know who's going to be the guy, San Diego Cuse, but that's why it's fun to talk about. I mean, I made my stance clear, I hope by now, that I would want Hodgson over Hopkins based on what I know. Now, granted, I'm not in the room interviewing. I would like to know more information about Bryan Hodgson. I feel like I have a better grasp of who Mike Hopkins is than who Bryan Hodgson is. And you hear some wild stories about Hodgson and his personality, so I don't know how much that will play a factor, but he seems like more of a wild card. I love how you guys just say stuff as fact. Like, Hodgson isn't leaving USF for any other job than Syracuse. Do you know the guy? I mean, why are we so confident in that? Like, Jeff Goodman said, my pick is Hodgson to LSU. And with all due respect, I think I'm going to trust him more than you unless you present that you've had a conversation with the guy or something. Yeah, all you guys are like, he's scum. I mean, I've heard some wild stories, and you worry that when he gets up here, if he were to take the job, he might be like not aware of what the job entails compared to Hop, who is very aware. That's something I consider. Welcome back into Drive Time. Tuesday afternoon, it's our final show of the week, unfortunately. Women's basketball on Thursday at Notre Dame. I'll be on that trip tomorrow. And then lacrosse over the weekend. 2 games. 2 outdoor chilly games on tap for the men's lacrosse team. Can they dispel the narrative that they cannot win outdoors in February? What is it, like 4 games since they've won outdoors in February? Or you could say they haven't won since 2003. That sounds a little bit better for clickbait and everything. I think it's a legitimate concern. It's something that we're all thinking is the team looks better indoors in better weather, but let's not get too worried about the lacrosse team after they lost to a very good Harvard team. Harvard last year, I think, was maybe the best lacrosse team in the country. They just couldn't win faceoffs, and I tend to think Harvard is top 5 good in the nation. And I don't know how I would have voted on the Inside Lacrosse poll or one of those polls this week if I did have to do that. Maybe that's something I'll chat about with Kyle Federley when we have our pregame, because I know Kyle votes on all that stuff, and he has to take time and do his research, and this was one of those weeks that was very challenging to vote on for men's lacrosse. The SU women's lacrosse team is in action right now. Let's see if I can get a score update on that. They're taking on Loyola, and I have been impressed in the Reggie Thorpe era to this point by how they have looked. I know that some of you just look at the record. We have this conversation a lot on the show of don't just look at the record, but also take into account everything that is going on. And SU Women's Lacrosse is playing number 13 Loyola. They are up 5-4 right now in the second period. Thank God. If I was just complimenting them and I pulled it up and they were down 9-1, I would have looked really dumb. 5-4, they are leading. They are 0-3 on the season, but they played 3 of the best teams in the country. So I would not freak out. They're going to start winning some games, and I'm very impressed by what I've seen to this point from the start of the Reggie Thorpe era. I think water will find its level a little bit with the women's lacrosse team. Women's basketball will have a tough test on Thursday night at Notre Dame. If you'd like to call in, we can get to more of your thoughts on the phone lines before we wrap up this afternoon. 315-437-7644. Let's work in another break, get back on time here, and we can wrap up with a phone call. Also, I have some of the sound earlier. I've sort of teased some of the comments from Kevin Sweeney, and we had him on. He's a college basketball writer for Sports Illustrated. He was on Orange Nation earlier today. That full convo is up on our Q Sports Talk YouTube page. We can play back some of his comments and react to some of the interesting stuff he said earlier today on Orange Nation. That's all ahead. You're listening to Drive Time, or you're watching it on QSportsTalk.com.
Check out my...
Well, if that's your opinion on Jeff, we'll see. We can compare notes. But I know some people just don't like the people that are in a position like Jeff, and I'm not saying he's batting 1,000. No one is. And I know a lot of people dislike Jeff. But I'm sorry if I'm going to take his word more than you, Daniel Angelo, who I've never met or don't know anything about. If you present a reason for why you are very confident in what you're saying, then I'll take it differently. But my overall point was saying stuff like Hodgson isn't leaving USF for any other job than Syracuse. What's your basis for that? Like, you know, we can't just come out and say stuff. I mean, maybe that's more just your opinion. And then you could say, I don't see Hodgson leaving for any other job, but it's very definitive the way we're phrasing stuff here. Pete Thamel does seem to know all the Syracuse news before it gets out there. He's got some good source here in the Q's. Yeah, I can't remember specifically what Goodman was saying then. I mean, that conversation was literally like Red or GMAC. So... I honestly don't remember if he was saying GMAC or Red, and it would not shock me to see you guys remember something the way you want it to be remembered. Sometimes that happens. But you guys could be right. I'm just presenting that I think Jeff Goodman is a more knowledgeable source than some random chatter, and I think that's fair. Fly Guy, I think you're right that we're trending towards Hopkins or Hodgson, but what if they don't get Hodgson? Then it opens up a different conversation, right? You got to be prepared for that too. The unique challenges, San Diego Cuse, would be the idea of you're sharing the dome with four other teams, and not any other school is battling for practice time. And I mean, I don't want to go into like too much detail, but there's just a lot of stuff that I feel like is unique to Syracuse. Also, just considering where you're living. I mean, Syracuse, New York is not on paper as attractive as maybe St. Louis to Josh Schertz, right? So if you are making the leap to move your family to a place that when you get back from games, it's sometimes below freezing and your car's covered in snow. And I would just say, like, there are some schools that are very forward-thinking and forward-thinking is maybe the wrong word. There are some schools that really prioritize sports. Syracuse has never really been that type of school. And that leads to a different conversation maybe, but LSU is probably just going to give money to men's basketball and football. Syracuse wants to spread it around some to all their athletic departments, probably more than others. And Syracuse prioritizes some of the stuff in the classroom maybe more than others. So there's some uniqueness to the job. All right, I believe you, Philly. Don't yell at me. Channeling my inner Polly. Oh, no. Don't ever say that again. I got to stop.
ESPN 97.7 and 100.1. Watch live on QSportsTalk.com.
Well, if Fayon says it. Final segment on Drive Time this afternoon. Final segment for the week. If you'd like to call in right now, we can work you in. We've talked a lot today about, you guessed it, Syracuse basketball and who their next head coach could be. It's Groundhog Day. We have no games to react to, so we're just continuing that same conversation. We're continuing the conversation on who are the candidates, who could they look at, what are the pros and cons for each candidate, and if you have been listening on the podcast platform throughout all the time that I've been talking about said candidates, and you think, Tim, you're not bringing up a point that I am talking about with my buddies, then you can call in, and I welcome you to join in on this conversation. It's a fascinating time right now around Syracuse athletics and all the things that are up in the air, and that's what everyone brings up. We keep referencing this conversation with Kevin Sweeney. He brought up how there's some uncertainty on where Syracuse stands in the college basketball landscape right now. And let's see if I can pull up those comments before I wrap up the show today. But he was basically getting at, this is the first chance we've seen where Syracuse is kind of exploring a national search potentially. It seems like they're going to look at all available candidates, whereas when it was replacing Jim Boeheim, it was the successor, and that was the decision they were making at that time, was basically Adrian Autry, GMAC, I'm guessing was the gist of the conversation, and it really wasn't much of a conversation probably because Adrian Autry was the associate head coach at that time. So this is going to be our first chance really to see how much will Syracuse be willing to elevate their resources. We talk a lot about the idea of a hometown discount that Jim Boeheim was taking all these years and how much that helped Syracuse. From what we understand, Syracuse has never paid a head coach of their men's basketball program a ton of money. And will they make the decision to start paying a head coach of the men's basketball program, I don't know, upwards of $3 million, $3.5 million, $4 million. Those are kind of the going rates for big-time schools right now. So this was Kevin Sweeney earlier today when I think Paulie posed the question of kind of Bryan Hodgson and where would Syracuse fall compared to other schools if Bryan Hodgson is a name that is wanted by other schools, which we assume. And he just goes on here for about 40 seconds, but again, a lot of you probably feel that your narrative is not going to be exactly fit with what Kevin Sweeney is about to say. And I would argue that we can't just only relate to the stuff that is fitting your agenda. Let's take into account everything. I'm not saying Kevin Sweeney is 100% accurate in what he says here, but here's one perspective. Here's another perspective. What we're trying to do on the show here is get some national college basketball writers in and ask the question, how good of a job is Syracuse, and see what their answer is. And we'll get some different answers here, and it'll be fascinating to kind of react to that. But here was Kevin Sweeney earlier today talking about Syracuse.
But look, I think there's a lot of questions around the industry about what the Syracuse job is, right? It's so, Like, is it a Jim Boeheim job or is it a Syracuse job? And that's impactful, right? And so because especially with the administrative uncertainty, like what do the resources look like? What is the vision for the place when I walk in there on my first day? Like what does my boss want it to look like? I think all of those are very real questions. I think people really value the fan base and the tradition and the history, and I think that can help it stand alone among some of the other jobs that are on the market. It's not a great cycle of jobs, quite frankly. It's a lot of mid and lower tier power conference gigs. But at the same time, there's a lot of uncertainty, and Syracuse is falling behind in a lot of regards from a financial standpoint, and they will have to, and it's not just NIL, right? It's coach salaries, it's staff pool, it's everything that goes into it that I think, coaches and their agents will be very keen on hearing about.
So that's the big question we don't really have the answers to. And we're going to have a better gauge coming out of this looming cycle of where Syracuse fits and the conversation of just how good of a job is this. Is it a top 20 job in the country? Is it top 30? Some of you would argue, it's top 10, Tim. Their winning record and how much they've won as a program puts them top 10. I would say there's nothing right now that indicates this is a top 10 job. Let's be a little bit more realistic about the last 10 years have been what they have been. And Syracuse is in a position in a new reality in college sports where money is talking more than ever. And NIL and resources that you spend on your roster are really what coaches are keen in on and focusing on, that it's putting them in a different conversation. Maybe it's dropping them into a little bit of a different tier in terms of how good this job is in the year 2026 versus how good it was in 2009. It's still a good job. It's still one of the better jobs that we assume is going to be out there this year. And honestly, maybe one of the biggest things that you should be rooting for that we're not talking about enough is let's hope Ohio State doesn't open. Let's hope there's not any surprise retirements and Syracuse stays near the top of the pecking order right now. That's maybe a conversation I could do on a different show in the future here, is ranking all of the jobs that hypothetically could open. How would I rank them? Where would they fall, considering all the resources and all the intel we know, which nothing's 100% transparent, but we could have that conversation maybe at a later date and time. That's going to wrap up Drive Time, unfortunately, for this week, but we will be back, of course, next week after I make the trek out to Notre Dame, and just couldn't work out with my schedule the rest of the week that we've got women's basketball Thursday night. I'll be calling that. And then men's lacrosse Friday at 4. I'll be calling that. And men's lacrosse Sunday as well against Penn for a weekend trip against the Ivy League schools. Thanks to all of you for following along and calling in. Thanks to Kyle for producing. And we'll talk to you next time on ESPN Radio and QSportsTalk.com.